All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us to the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. It is February 12th, 2021. We were very glad you're with us this morning. Our agenda, we'll start out with some success stories. I know of 4 different landings so far this week, and we may have a 5th, I don't know, but at least we have 4. 2 of those people are with us. Oh, Mark says he's got a couple too. All right.
Maybe.
Maybe. Then we'll do our 30-second introductions. We'll have everybody put their details into the chat box. I will copy that information and then get that out in an email this afternoon to everybody to see who else you can help. We'll then go to our committee reports, workshops, job fairs, the practice interview team, the interview success workshop, and then the career tip of the week. And then we'll hear from our speaker for the main event about background checks. For those people on Zoom, if you don't have your full name on there, like there's a Guy G, there's a Janet, there's a David B, we ask that if you can go hover over the little camera icon, and what'll come up is an option for you to rename yourself to be able to put in your full name. And then don't forget, underneath that, you can click that little remember my name for future meetings, and you'll never have to do this again. So please put in your full name. It makes it easy for me to capture that information and make sure I get you added to the roster. For those on Zoom, we ask that if you have questions throughout the presentation, use the interview questions into the chat box. And for those people watching currently on Facebook, we ask that you use the comment field. I am monitoring that feed, and I'll be sure to get those questions asked to our speaker. Please note this event is currently being recorded. And we're currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and on the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, if you post a comment in the chat box or have your microphone or camera on, you give consent for your comment, name, and picture to appear. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Morris. I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group since 2007. The group's been around since the late 1990s. I took it over. There's been several different people leading the group over the years. I took it over in 2007 when the person who was leading it landed a full-time job. In 2008, I started Career DFW to create a website to help people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in their job search. In 2012, after being invited to go to the White House, I decided to launch CareerUSA.org to help people outside the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search That You May Not Know. It's available on Amazon for $15, or if you want to drive by the house, if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you can throw $10 at your window, and I will attempt to throw a book into your window as long as you drive really slowly. And since 2017, I've been a member of the practice interview team, and we'll hear more about the pit crew in just a couple minutes. Well, we like to start the meeting off with success stories. I told you we have 4 landings. Let me tell you about a couple, and then we've got a couple people live who will tell us their story too. So the first person I know about is Catherine Lusk. She's accepted a job at Christmas by Krebs as a junior staff accountant. She started this past Monday. She got it by applying online to a post. She says, I think the workshops helped her get the skills and confidence to be able to get the job, and she really appreciates everything we've done. Catherine makes number 16 for the year for the North Dallas group. Robin Raines has accepted a position with Sedgwick. She started this past Monday. She said it happened very quickly. A friend of hers who works for the company contacted her friend who is a company director. She basically put me on the hiring fast track. So thank you for starting Career DFW, Career USA. Both were very helpful to me, and I'm thankful for your passion in helping the unemployed and underemployed. So Robin makes number 17. Sandor, you want to tell us your story?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. My name is Sandor Korpenai. I just landed a position with Fenestra Corporation. They are a core banking solution provider. I will be the lead solutions consultant for Latin and South America. I applied online on December 1st. I saw the position opened up on LinkedIn, and I went to their website and applied directly there. I went through 7 rounds of interviews in English and Spanish because I am Spanish speaking. And I'm actually going to be starting on February 26th with my first day in the office being March 1st. I'll be based in Dallas, but traveling a lot. So I'm excited for that opportunity.
And so I thought I heard that the bottom statistic you gave that your job search took 39 weeks and you applied for 173 jobs. How many of those 173, how many of those jobs or how many of those applications did you get an interview out of?
I interviewed for probably at least 15 positions through multiple levels.
Okay. Well, very good. Congratulations. Thank you for sharing your information. Any bit of advice you want to give people? One tip you would tell people?
Yeah, this is an emotional roller coaster. Don't let yourself get, don't take it too terribly personally. If all of a sudden they say you're not the candidate, there is a job out there waiting for you. Use the tips and tricks that you learn in these sessions. Learn the tips and tricks that you learn from talking to your job search accountability team, and keep your chin up. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. Well, thank you. So did you have an accountability group in addition to the networking groups you had online?
I was part of an accountability team with Lee Hecht Harrison, and then when our programs ended, we splintered off and started our own accountability team. And I've been running that accountability team, or at least setting it up, for the last couple months. So I'll be handing the reins of that over to one of the other lucky members, since I will be engaged full-time otherwise.
Great. Well, thank you. I think accountability groups are a great way, accountability partners are a great way to sort of keep you going through the week. So I'm glad to hear that you had one. Congratulations. Thank you very much for sharing. Sandra makes number 18 for the for us so far. And for number 19, Dino, tell us your good news.
Okay. Actually, it's TCS. NTT Data is the old one.
What's the name of the company?
TCS.
TCS.
Yes, and I did see the initial job out there on LinkedIn and started to apply for it, but then was contacted by a recruiter as well. So I dropped the online part and went with the recruiter back in very early December. And yeah, after 2.5 months, and I went through 2 interviews, and I did use the pit crew for that, especially the second interview. Which was very tailored specific. So, kudos to the pit crew. I mean, just watching that video was fantastic, and get me to improve my interviewing ability for round 2. And then I got the offer. Kind of interesting that I had nothing for 2.5 months, and then within 24 hours, I had 3 offers. So I took the TCS offer.
Well, congratulations. So how long was it from the time you saw that first ad till you accepted the offer?
I saw the first ad in very early December, and then I accepted the offer a couple of days ago.
Okay, very good. Any tip that you'd like number one tip you'd like to share with other job seekers?
Yeah, definitely start practicing and for your interviews. Contact the pit crew, because even before I had my first interview with TCS, I actually did an interview, did an on-site interview very early on. I was called. So I thought, oh, this is great. I've been notified, and here it is a couple of weeks. And I went and did an interview and discovered very quickly that I needed a lot, even though I prepared, I needed a lot of help. So I went through with the pit crew, helped tremendously. Carol, with her resume tips and tricks, got my resume in shape. And I started getting far more calls from recruiters and for interviews once I got my resume in shape. So those are the 2 main things.
Great. Well, Dino, thank you very much. Congratulations. As we tell all of our job seekers, we hope we never see you again, but probably in a couple of years you may pop back in here, because
hey, it was 12 years ago when back in 2008, back with the South Lake group, and then the Fort Worth CSN started. So I got there on the ground floor, and it's been 12 years. And I had to come back.
Right. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Dino, for being with us. You make number 19 for the year. So congratulations. Do we have any other landings? Anybody else who I don't know about?
I see I have one, Jeff. Liz, Chavez, who's a member of the pit crew, has landed at it's a part-time role with Corn Ferry, helping them do outplacement for some of their large clients. Her background, she worked for 20 plus years at IBM and most recently has been at UTD in their career development office, helping graduates, prepare their resumes and prepare to interview. And so now she's going to be doing this for Corn Ferry, helping them with their outplacement.
Very good. Anyone else? Anybody, any other landings? All right, we will move on. Okay, what we'd like everybody to do now is, if you will, open up your chat box, or though for those on Facebook, you can just put everything in your in the comment field. We'd like to ask you if you put in your name, a comma, a phone number, a comma, email address, comma, the position you're looking for, comma, and 2 or 3 target companies, and then hit the return key. By doing that, everything will be in one little, makes it real easy for me to just capture that information, and I will get this information out to everybody this afternoon. So if you will do that, that would be great right now. And for those people on Facebook, I will delete your personal information as soon as this meeting's over with, so it will not be sitting out there forever and ever and ever. So 30 seconds on the clock. Whoops, what happened here? Well, maybe we don't have our music today. Well, it looks like PowerPoint has decided to mess up, so let me go relaunch it. Let everybody put their information in. Okay, we won't try to play the audio. We will just wait, give everybody a few more seconds to get their information put in. Technical, can't live with computers, you can't live without them. Always an issue. All right, y'all can keep going by putting your information in. We're gonna move on while we're going on. Job career fairs, training and workshops. Good morning, Eldon.
Good morning. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy chilly Friday, but soon to get colder, if I can believe the weather report. Of course, my name is Eldon Zorinsky. I'm focusing today on career and job fairs and special workshops or events. The information that I'm about to present to you comes from the website careerdfw.org, the calendar tab. You look at the calendar tab, there are many categories of events on there. And again, I focus on career and job fairs and special workshops or events. I go through these fairly quickly. So if you hear something that catches your ear, I urge you to go to the calendar, click on that event, and you will usually find more information about the event and or a link to register, or a Zoom or a Facebook link to participate. This week's career and job fairs. Unfortunately, there are no scheduled career or job fair events this week. However, there are some special workshops. On Monday, February 15th from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m., Mastering the Virtual Interview, sponsored by Senior Source. And you can watch this on Facebook, and there's a link in the calendar for that one. Online Employability with the Background, Monday, February 15th from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That will be sponsored by the Cross City Church of Euless. And there is a link to participate in that one, and it probably is going to be relevant to what we're going to be talking about later. Next up, online LinkedIn Tuesdays at 1 p.m. online. This is a rotating seminar between Locke Alderson, Terry Sullivan, Ruth Lipsky, and Kurt Vandemotter. There's a Zoom link for that and a Facebook page. Again, that's Tuesday, February 16th from 1 to 2:30. Online CSN Recruiter Roundup, Tuesday, February 16th from 6:45 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. And if you look at the calendar for that one, there's quite a few renowned people on participating in that, including Gail Houston, Rex Showett, Abby Kohut, Paul Cameron, Rick Martinez, Andy Cook, Mary Leone, and Shelley Casino. There's a Zoom link for that. And if you've never heard some of these people via the Career Transition Workshop, then I would urge you to participate in that. Online interviewing Wednesdays. This is Mark McDonald and Walt Glass. They have a series of topics that they cover. This week's session is discussing compensation and the circumstances around leaving previous positions. And that will be Wednesday, February 17th from 1 p.m. to 2:30. And finally, online resume Thursdays. It's effective resumes with Carol Brickell, a certified professional career coach. And there's a Zoom link and a Facebook link for that one. Again, that's February 18th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And that's
actually the speaker, we're going to have a special guest speaker, Rex Sayot from the Frisco Career Transition Workshop will be our guest speaker. Carol's taking the week off, so that'll be this Thursday. And then also, how about next Friday?
Next Friday, is that the career?
No, next Friday morning is the LOT, Internet of Things.
Oh, yes, I missed that one. I'm sorry, Jeff. Yeah, that's the online Internet of Things Special Interest Group Breakfast, Friday, February 19th from 9:40 a.m. to, from 7:40 a.m. to 9 a.m. This is hosted by Ed Hightower. If you're interested in the Internet of Things, I strongly urge you to participate in that. They usually have a very good speaker and a pretty good breakfast if they were meeting in person, but I think they're meeting virtually right now.
Yeah, you'll have to supply your own breakfast. You have to supply your own breakfast this week.
Right.
All righty. And just FYI, I've added another event on here this Saturday, next Saturday. I found out there's some recycling events going on for electronics, and the details are on there. So if you've got leftover stuff you're trying to get rid of around the house, here's a way to not fill up the landfills and be responsible for recycling things. So they're in a couple different locations around the Plano area, and I've added those to the website. All right, Eldon, thank you very, very much. All right, if you're looking for another webinar or another program to use and that from at least another program from the DFW area, if you click right here where it says webinar, teleseminars, radio and TV shows, it will take you to the light purple calendar. And on there, it'll look something like this, and it'll have all the different events that are happening on a weekly basis. It'll have Zoom links and everything on there, so you can find out other events that are going on. So if you have a little bit of free time, you can join one of these other groups. If you know somebody who just lost their job, I understand the unemployment rate went up again this past week, or unemployment, people filing for unemployment. If you know somebody who's brand new, who just lost their job, tell them to go to the website and tell them to click here for help. I've got a one-page article that's got a lot of great links to some other articles, handouts about what you should do in your job search, things to get yourself going, just some really great advice on how to get your job search going, because a lot of times when you have just gotten laid off, you're sort of in a funk and you're not really sure what to do. All right, Mark, let's hear about the practice interview team.
All right, good morning, everybody. And I'm going to mess Jeff up here because I'm going to do my LinkedIn profile first. So if you want to know more about me, he kept up. Please send an invitation to me to LinkedIn. I work mostly in the telecommunications industry in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and have a pretty good sized network. And you can search on the PIT crew, or you can search on my name there, and you'll find me very quickly. So that's me. I guess the important thing to mention is my career started going downhill in 2002 when the telecommunications industry had a big, huge recession, which began a long decline. And so between 2002 and 2012, I was laid off 3 times. So fortunately, though, that 3rd time in early 2013, I got involved in the PIT crew and have been doing the PIT crew ever since. So at first I was a volunteer, I gave the interviews, and then as Jeff mentioned, the leader of the PIT crew moved away, and so I assumed responsibility in early 2014. So the PIT crew is all about giving you a chance to practice your interview and build your expertise in interviewing, and it's completely free. It's run by a group of volunteers, myself included, but also a large group. I have about 30 or so hiring managers who are on my distribution list. So they are the ones who volunteer to interview you, and they prepare, they take this very seriously and will prepare in advance. And a lot of candidates are surprised at how well prepared they are, but they're prepared because you provide your job description and your resume. So pick out a job that looks good to you. It doesn't even have to be one that you're engaged in. It can just be one that your dream job, for example. And let me know that it's not really a company that's on your list, and we won't ask you questions about the company. But otherwise, we're going to give you, as best we can, a mock interview. You'll ask questions about the company. We'll ask you questions about your greatest achievements and mistakes you may have made in the past, things you consider to be failures. What are your soft skills? We'll ask you all these questions. We'll give you a chance to practice answering them. And then afterwards, you'll get feedback from the team that's interviewed you about what you did well. So those are things, we want to focus on those as well. But areas where you might need some improvement or alternative ways of telling your story. So a lot of times we tell people they talk too much. Okay, that's they can't be brief and focused, and so that's what they need to be. And as Dino said, seeing the video of yourself really brings home those soft spots in your interview skills. And so you get a video as part of it, a Zoom video. So that's how the practice interview team works. When we used to meet face-to-face, we would have an education session at the end of the meeting, and it was only 15 or 20 minutes long. But now that we're virtual, Walt and I put together all the things that would come up during those sessions and that we would talk about. And so that is now the virtual pit crew interview Wednesdays. Jeff runs the meeting, and Walt and I present 13 different topics about interviewing. So we wrote down everything we wanted to make sure you understood about interviewing, and it turned out to take up 13 topics. So we have finished the first 5, which were all about preparing. This week we started effective interviewing. It's another session of 5, or another group of 5 sessions. And next week we're going to be talking about, what was the topic, Eldon?
Discussing compensation and the circumstances around.
Yeah, we're going to be
leaving
talking about a
previous
couple of important questions that trip people up. Why did you leave your last job, and what are your salary requirements? So we'll spend a whole session discussing how to approach those questions, prepare for them, and deliver them. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Walt, good morning.
Well, good morning, everyone. Jeff, I got a short hidden agenda item. Could I give that one first? It won't take long.
Okay.
All right. This is a tip. All right. I noticed a lot of you put company names and things like that in your chat window. I would suggest that you do the following. Number 1, at a minimum, the name of the company is the exact name I will find on LinkedIn. I've seen some companies come out, and I go out to LinkedIn, and there's multiple companies, and I don't know which one it is that somebody's looking for. As a plus, you can parentheses, you can actually put the LinkedIn address of that company, so that if I'm looking, I can just copy that in, go right to LinkedIn, make it very easy for me to help find people in that company. So that's my tip. So what am I really about? Well, I didn't take over anything. I just failed and flunked an interview so badly back in 2000 that I figured I'd better do something about it. So I developed an interview success workshop, and it really focuses on the fundamentals of 3 things, plus differentiation. How do I differentiate myself from other candidates? And those 3 things that we have to learn is the breakdown of selling ourselves. So how do we sell who we are, what we do, and how we can help? How do we build rapport? Think about your greeting. It's probably okay greeting, but I'll tell you what, it's probably not different. And if I'm the interviewer and I just have several candidates, I just don't see anything different about it, in a nice conversational tone, a little energy, a little enthusiasm, that sort of thing. And so, it's just the fundamentals. You don't have to be prepared for this interview. All I need is a job description so that you have focus, and I can determine relevancy of the answers to the particular job. I have to be registered to attend. Look me up on my LinkedIn page, and it'll give you information, because my current job is the workshop, and they'll give you some details. There's the Yahoo address to send and say, I'd like to participate. I need some dates. I'll send you back some availability. I have a slot open next Tuesday. The next 2 Tuesdays, I have a slot open each if you're interested in jumping in. So you can be anywhere in the process of improving your interview, from I haven't done anything to, yeah, I've had several practices. So come down and sit down to learn, not sit down to be examined, tested, and struck with lightning if you give the wrong answer. So it's just a way to have some fun and energize ourselves with some content, some ways that, and options and strategies and approaches and techniques that we might be able to answer categories of questions. So we deal with the fundamentals. So I would love to have you participate. We do it on Zoom on Tuesdays about 10 to 12. So I would call this workshop Learning Without Squirming. Well, I imagine you want to close from me today, Jeff. So once again, I ask your attention. Practice interviewing. I continue to mention it's practice that puts you on top, and you can be the cream of the crop.
Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. It's always nice to have. Do we have a number for which poem this is?
That particular one, well, I'm recycling a few of them.
Okay.
But I got about 90 now.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to next week's poem again also. All right, it's time for
if everybody wants to send me $50, I'll write them all down and send you a copy.
It's time for the career tip of the week. Roxanne, I know you announced your landing last week, and this will be the last week Roxanne's doing it. So I'm going to need a new volunteer. So somebody out there, we need you to step up and tell me that you'd like to take over the career tip of the week. So Roxanne, thank you for the last few months doing this, and tally ho.
Yeah, it was actually fun. I enjoyed it. Good morning. The career tip of the week is what to do after a final round job interview by Rebecca Knight. You made it through the final round job interview, and now you're waiting to hear whether or not you're hired. This stretch of time can feel like agony. So what should you do in the meantime? Is it appropriate and expected to send handwritten thank you notes, or is email better? If you thought of the perfect answer to one of the interview questions after the fact, should you reach out to the hiring manager? How long should you wait before following up to see if they've made a decision? And how do you avoid ruminating about the job while you wait? What the experts say. This waiting period between your interview and the company's decision is so stressful because often you and the organization do not share the same sense of urgency. While you're singularly focused on whether or not you got the job, they have plenty of other things to deal with. Warning, during this time, you're at risk of counterproductive behaviors, including doubting your own abilities, coming across to your prospective employer as desperate, and perhaps worst of all, not pursuing other jobs. While the hiring decision is out of your hands at this point, you're not powerless. There are some immediate actions after an interview that can provide a candidate with a competitive advantage. Say thank you. Your most pressing post-interview duty is to thank the people who took the time to talk to you. The message should communicate that you're even more excited about the job and confident that you want it. Personalize the message by mentioning something positive that happened during the interview. If your interview took place at a company office, you could send an old-fashioned pen and paper thank you note. This is a classy personal touch. If your interview took place virtually, it's best to stick with digital communication. If you don't have your interviewer's contact information, but communicated with someone else at the company to arrange the meeting, you can send that person an email letting them know how much you appreciated theirs and the interviewer's time. Make sure to mention the people you spoke with by name and write your message with the assumption that it could be forwarded to them. Send follow-up materials. In addition to a thank you note, recommended sending supporting material, including samples of your work that might have come up in an interview. Sending additional information could strengthen your case and help sway their decision. Along those lines, recommend sending a news article that's pertinent to the organization. It could be about technology the company is considering adopting, how the pandemic is impacting their business, or some other relevant trend. By doing so, you're subtly saying, I understand your needs. Resist the urge for a do-over. It's natural to mull over mistakes and questions you didn't answer well after the interview. Everyone comes out of the job interview thinking, I wish I had said this instead of that. The French expression, esprit d'escalier, which means thinking of a witty remark in hindsight, is apt. And while it's tempting to ring up the hiring manager and re-answer the interview question you've flubbed, it's wise to exercise restraint. It's best to just leave it be. But occasionally make an exception. The only exception to this rule is when you have something particularly useful to add to the conversation. If, for instance, you can connect a piece of relevant evidence about yourself to an organizational need, then it might be worth speaking up. It's important to be warm, professional, and brief. Seek positive distractions. Waiting to hear whether you got the job can be stressful, but try not to dwell on it. While you wait it out, seek positive distractions. Cultivate your hobbies, get some exercise, dig into that juicy novel that's sitting on your nightstand. Spend time with friends and colleagues who elevate your self-image. Talk with people in your professional network about how to regenerate ideas for different job possibilities. Do due diligence. Another way to pass the time productively is to figure out whether or not you actually want the job, should it become yours for the taking. Even without an offer, there's information gathering you could do in the meantime. This is also a good time to finalize your job acceptance criteria. Set your minimum salary requirements and develop a plan for how you'll negotiate other important details. The goal is to be prepared for the call that says they want you, but be careful not to get your hopes up. Keep your options open. You also need to prepare yourself for negative news. There are a dozen of arbitrary reasons that the job will not be offered to you. The organization might change direction, and they might have a hiring freeze, or some senior manager could decide that they don't want to fill that position. That's why you need to continue to explore other opportunities. Anticipate the flattering effects of rejection. If you've got other conversations going, the rejection will have less impact. If you put your life on hold, though, it's much more of an emptying experience. Be judicious about when you follow up. Deciding how long to wait before following up to see if the hiring manager has made a decision is tricky. You don't want to be a job beggar mode, and checking in frequently could put you in a worse bargaining position. At your final interview, ask the hiring manager how long they anticipate it will be before an offer is made. And if they say a week, double it, because things always take longer than planned. Still, it's worth following up within the time frame they gave you to show that you're still interested in the job, but be respectful and don't push. An email that says something along the lines of no response necessary. I just want to let you know that I'm still interested could help you stand out from other candidates. Principles to remember. Do offer gratitude to the hiring manager with either a handwritten note or an email. Provide backup support materials such as samples of your work to strengthen your case. Spend your time productively by doing due diligence on the company and finalizing your personal job acceptance criteria. Don't ask for a do-over on a question you flubbed, unless you can offer highly relevant information that speaks to an organizational need. Don't let the stress get to you. Distract yourself during the waiting period. And don't stop looking for other jobs. Keep your options open by exploring other opportunities. That's Career Tip of the Week. Good luck, everyone. And it's been a real pleasure having the opportunity to present the Friday's Career Tip.
Well, Roxanne, thank you very much. Also, there's a couple case studies on this. It's sort of when I saw this tip, and I'm going, oh man, this is the longest tip I've ever posted. I actually have one that's even longer, and I went, oh, this is going to be Roxanne's last tip to have to read. I emailed her during the week. I said, it's okay if you want to shorten it up, but there are a couple case studies at the end of this tip you may want to go and read and just catch up on. So the Career Tip of the Week, it'll be available tomorrow till 1 o'clock on Saturday, and then the new tip of the week will load tomorrow about 1 o'clock. So you may want to check it out. So Roxanne, thank you very much. Congratulations on your new job, and may we never see you again. All righty. Coming up here in just a couple minutes, we'll hear from our speaker all about background checks. Coming up, just want to let you know about next week. Our speaker is going to talk about transitions, making the sense of life changes. In 2 weeks, keeping your eye on the prize, continuing, learn and adapt for career success. So those are just a couple of things popping up here. I do want to just make sure everybody realizes that Career DFW, careerusa.org, those are separate. That's a separate nonprofit organization from the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. The North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group's been around since the late 1990s. It's a bunch of people who used to get together on Friday mornings up in Plano. Now we're meeting via Zoom. The only common link between the Career DFW, which is a 501c3, and the North Dallas Group is that I happen to facilitate and lead both. If anybody would like to overthrow me here and take over the reins and do the Friday meeting, you're welcome to do so. But Career DFW, you will not be getting out of my hands. So I just want to, make sure this is not the Friday group of Career DFW. All right, it's time to hear from our speaker. Mike's been with us several times over the last several years. He's an entrepreneur, a human resource professional. He's a licensed private investigator and an HR consultant. In 1999, he created Imperative to bring high quality, oops, there we go. I just lost my thing here. To improve high quality, high tech, high touch to the background screening market. Today, Imperative, his company serves hundreds of businesses across the U.S. and helps many more private estates, family offices, and personal service agencies. Mike is a senior professional in the HR resources, so SPHR is his certification. He lives in Fort Worth, and Mike, thank you very much. Oh, you've got all the details right here. So, thank you for being with us. Thank you for continuing to speak to our group every year.
Thanks, Jeff. Just a real quick audio check. Everybody can hear me okay?
We can.
Perfect. Okay. Well, it's good to be back with you guys. I really appreciate the, I went backwards for some reason. Let me switch my, there we go. It's, I don't know how many times I've spoken to your group over the years, Jeff, at least probably 10 or more. And I always appreciate the opportunity to do that. I've done a year now of all kinds of conference presentations via Zoom, and I'm probably as ready as the rest of you to get back in person. But I'm glad you guys figured out how to continue doing what you do, helping job seekers and helping companies find the right people virtually. So we've just all worked hard to just march on this year. So congratulations to all of you for doing that, and to Jeff, because there are a lot of groups out there that aren't doing anything, and thought it would be 3 months and they didn't do anything. Thought, well, it'll be 3 more months, we won't do anything, and now it's a year into it and they're not. So good for you guys. Well, I am here to talk about background checks from the job seekers point of view. Like Jeff said, I own a background screening company. I'm an HR guy who over 20 years ago got into the background screening business to help one client, and that's kind of grown now. I've got a couple dozen employees who are all working virtually now, doing background checks for our clients all over the country. And we'll talk about some of the different kinds of issues that face employers from the background check process. But my main focus today is to help you understand what employers are really trying to do with background checks and understand your legal rights when it comes to background checks. So we all know, if you've been around career DFW or any of the other groups very long, you've heard the idea of behavioral event interviewing, where employers ask you questions, really specific questions about something, some experience in your past, and then they dig deeper. They keep unpeeling that onion to get into what your core motivations were in that circumstance, try to determine how involved you maybe really were in a certain kind of project, and what kind of logic you applied or what kind of behaviors you applied into into whatever circumstance that was. And the whole idea behind that is that your past behavior is a predictor, not the only predictor, but a predictor of your future behavior. So the kind of decisions you made in the past may reflect onto the how you'll perform in the job, in the work environment. So what you've got on the left here is a guy, about to fail his roadside DWI check. And on the right, you've got a bomb. So if this guy bombs on the left, you may not want him being the forklift driver in your munitions factory, right? And so there are certain things that we just know are going to really cast doubt as to whether someone is a good fit for a position in a certain role. And so I spend a lot of time talking to employers about the risks associated with different jobs. For instance, a DWI that's 3 years old for someone who sits behind a desk all day is probably not a highly relevant piece of information in determining if that person's qualified for the work. But a simple theft, a misdemeanor theft from 6 months ago could be extremely relevant to that person sitting behind the desk, depending on the kind of access they have, whether it's personally identifiable information or company or customer accounts, things like that. So employers, good employers anyway, are looking at the risks associated with the job and tying those, somebody's criminal history and their background into what does that mean for this person in this role.
Okay, all right.
And so, sorry. So when we're talking about criminal history, I want you to just forget everything you've seen on TV. We see them on CSI or any of those kinds of law and order type shows. They get a toenail clipping from a suspect and drop it in a vial and get a DNA match. And then the next thing you know, they've got this person's whole history, their 5th grade teacher's name, their roommate in college, and their cellie at Rikers are all just laid right there. There's no system like that. There's no even a national database that's very reliable of criminal history. So the idea that everything is in one place, well, I would be out of business if everything was one place. If employers could just go to one source and spend $50 and get all the available information, they wouldn't need me. Even the FBI's national database, the National Crime Information Center database, is missing about half of the record. Well, half the records in the database are incomplete, and really the government doesn't even know how many records they're missing, because in the US, all of our criminal records are decentralized, and it's really up to local jurisdictions as to whether they report all of their records to the FBI. So this is why you often hear stories when we're talking, usually after some sort of horrible shooting, you hear all these stories about people who were able to purchase a firearm, but they weren't legally qualified to do so because of a felony or some other issue. Well, it's because Big Brother just isn't that organized and doesn't have that good of information on us. And so the same database that the FBI is using is the same one that they're using for gun purchases and stuff like that. So that's the reason that the federal government, when they hire someone, basically uses, especially if they've got some sort of clearance, the same process we use when we're serving our clients to help with background checks. Because you hear this, if you go online and do a search for background check or search for national background check, you'll get a list of companies that are wanting to sell you from anywhere from $15 to $50 a national or comprehensive or nationwide criminal background check. And there's just no such thing. If by national, nationwide, or comprehensive, you mean something that's very thorough. Because in the US, all of our court records are so decentralized, they're down to the local county level. And then many, many of those records are not even at the county level, they're at the municipal level. So here in Tarrant County, where I'm based, I think there's 33 different municipalities just in the county. And your lowest level misdemeanors that are cited by local police show up in those municipalities. And so you don't even see them at the county levels of criminal records. And then you've got the state level criminal records, which are it's only a state repository that's being funneled up to the state from the local counties, and records disappear in that process as well. So whenever you're seeing a national database, what you're really seeing is a private company that's gone out and tried to purchase or collect from the internet or wherever else, whatever records they can get their hands on. Our tests show that the so-called national databases miss about half of the records that we would report to our clients in our standard background check. But everybody likes that idea of a background check that just comes back instantly and it's got all the information. It just doesn't exist, and it's not what you would call, what is out there is not very reliable. In fact, Texas DPS, which is the state, which holds Texas Criminal Record Repository, the Department of Public Safety system, is relying on all the local counties to report their information. And these are three guys who were, a few years ago, we ran everybody on death row in Texas through DPS's database. And DPS was missing about 40% of the people on death row were missing from the DPS's database. And these are three of the guys who are local folks that some of you may recognize, all for murder, serial rapists who killed their folks, things like that. So you can't just rely on any single source of information. You have to, an employer is digging deeper. If they're doing any kind of decent background check, they're digging deeper beyond just some state or national database. So how do you get the information? Well, like I said, it's all located at the local county. And so that's the best research you can get. So what we do for our clients is, and this is what many employers do, they go to each county associated with the person in the last, we do 10 years. Many background check companies only do 7 years. So they're looking at where people have lived, worked, or attended school in the last 7 or 10 years. And we have clients that are very risk averse and have us go back 20 years or 30 years or back to the age of 18, whatever it is, because they want a much more thorough background check because of the risks associated with putting the wrong person in the wrong seat in their organization. And so what that really means is that if somebody lived here in Fort Worth, you got to go to the Tarrant County Courthouse and check those criminal records. If they lived in Austin, you go to Travis County. And if they lived in Laredo, you go down to Webb County and check the criminal records in that courthouse. Some of these courthouses do have their records available online. Roughly 70% of the counties out there have records online of some sort, but a lot of them don't put all of their records out there. Some only show convictions only. They don't show active pending cases or maybe dismissed cases. And so we'll often hear from an applicant where we reported a case that was maybe dismissed or something like that. And the applicant's kind of angry because they say, hey, I've had 2 other background checks for other jobs, and this never came back. And now you're reporting it. So they're not disputing the accuracy of the information. They're just kind of ticked off that we found it. So that's the variation between different background check companies' policies or their practices. But we always, and employers really relying on a good background check, is always going to make sure that they're checking whatever is equivalent to the live actual records in the counties where this person's lived, worked, attended school in the last 10 years. And what you do need to understand is that most employers are reviewing all criminal cases, not just convictions. So if a criminal case was filed, an employer wants to understand what happened in that case, even if it was dismissed, because there are a variety of reasons things can be dismissed, right? So, for instance, the most common thing that you see surprise applicants is they received deferred adjudication for a case, which means they pled guilty or no contest to the offense, and then they were given probation, and upon completing the probation, the case can be dismissed. Now, they pled guilty or no contest to it, and it's perfectly reasonable for an employer to say, okay, we're concerned about the conduct. We're not concerned about whether you had a great lawyer and he got you deferred adjudication versus this other guy who got a court-appointed lawyer and just pled guilty. The employers, and this is according to even the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the employer's concern should be, is it reasonable to believe this person engaged in this conduct? And if they did, how is that conduct relevant to the job? So when we're advising our clients, I recommend they review all cases that are available, and they ask applicants about all cases that are available, all cases that, in their past, regardless of the outcome, so that they can understand what really happened in those circumstances. And then they can make the decision as to whether the information is relevant for the job they're considering them for. And then beyond criminal history, we're looking at often driving histories. Employers look at driving histories for a couple of reasons. First, to assess safety performance if they're operating a motor vehicle, but also if they're operating forklifts or heavy equipment, or we've got an industrial client that has these big machines in their production area that are just being in close proximity to the machine requires a high level of security, safety awareness, that kind of thing. And if they see somebody with a really negative driving history with multiple incidents in the last couple of years, then they're going to be concerned about putting that person in a role that requires a high level of safety compliance and following, safety guidelines and procedures. And so the other thing about value to driving history is, even if the person's not driving and it's not really a safety sensitive position, pulling their driving history is a really good way to verify the identity information provided by the applicant. So you can verify quickly that this name and date of birth and address that this applicant gave you matches the government's record on the driving history. So at least that you still don't know that person that's sitting across the desk from you as your applicant is really the person they say they are, but at least they're really good at identity theft if they're not who they say they are, because the information matches at least a government record. And often we catch identity theft at this point in the background check right up front, because we can say, okay, the information they provide doesn't match, doesn't line up with what's on their driving history. And as we said earlier, past behavior predicts future behavior. So employers often want to verify employment, education, and any license and certification claims. So I'm always advising employers, verify this stuff, even education. And if the education claimed doesn't line up with what's required for the job. So if somebody said, they're applying for an administrative clerical position and they said 10 years ago they got a Bachelor of Arts in psychology, and it's not really relevant to the job. Maybe the job doesn't even require a bachelor's degree. However, and this is the lesson I'm constantly trying to convince employers about, if they lie to you coming in the door, it's not reasonable to expect their behavior to change after you hire them. And we see more people lying about their education history than lying about their criminal history. So we see a lot of fake degrees from degree mills, or people who say they attended a college and they never even attended the school. We also see them make up employment. They've got a gap in employment, so they change the dates of termination or the date of hire to kind of cover that space, or they just throw in another employer altogether that they never worked at. And we see that, and they'll list, we catch them pretty regularly. They'll list a supervisor and a phone number on the application. But when we call to verify that employment, we will find out that, something's not right here. I'm calling this number, the supervisor, but it's a cell phone. And he's like, oh yeah, John. Yeah, he was a great employee, but they really don't have a lot of detail information. So, and then we call the actual employer, and the actual employer's never heard of either one of those folks, the alleged previous supervisor or the applicant. So we see a lot of those kinds of things. I see their questions, and if it's okay, I will wait till the end to do those, because I'm trying to pay attention to comments over here and the screen over here and the camera. My ADD kicks in pretty quickly. And some employers do use credit history to try to figure out, assess whether somebody's appropriate for a specific job. Now, what you need to know, you often hear in the media often talks about how somebody's credit score stopped them from getting a job. That's 99% of the time, that's not the case, because employers shouldn't be getting credit scores when they pull a credit report on an applicant. Credit scores, the FICO scores, were developed to estimate someone's likelihood of being able to repay a debt. And that is not anything relevant to employment. So the credit bureaus will not sell a credit report with a credit score to an employer for use in employment screening. It happens sometimes. I see it happen most often with small banks, because somebody from HR just walks over to the lending department and hands them the applicant's name and social security number, and they run the credit report that way. without changing the permissible purpose, which would change what comes out of the credit report. So, but employers are interested in your credit, especially where you've got financial or fiduciary responsibilities for the organization, especially if you're managing company accounts or client accounts, or maybe you're being given a company credit card, things like that. They want to see that you're taking care of business, that your credit lines aren't being all maxed out, and that you're managing and your credit balances are in line with your income and those kinds of things. Now, I spend more time talking employers out of using credit than I do actually selling credit to them, because I do think there's this concept out there that, well, it's a degree or a measure of how honest somebody is or how reliable they are. And the reality is we all have incidents, things that happen in our lives that affect our credit from time to time. Maybe a family member loses their job. Maybe a kid gets sick and you have a lot of expenses that weren't, planned for, and you can't take care of those needs, along with, keeping your house payment or car payment or whatever other debt you have up to speed. So there's all kinds of things that don't really, that could happen, that don't really affect whether somebody's really honest or reliable. In fact, there was one of the few studies out there on this was with a financial institution, and they collected credit over a number of years. And then they went back and looked at all of those applicants they hired who had some sort of negative credit history against those who had, generally positive credit history. And they found there was no difference. They were no more, people with negative credit history were no more likely to be fired for cause, for any reason, than the other the positive credit population. And they were no more likely to have even quit or terminated their employment voluntarily than the other population. And they were no more likely to have performance issues than the other population. So it's not a predictor of general performance. So the only time I think employers should use credit is when they're looking at circumstances surrounding the direct job relations to the position. So I'm interested in, they're managing client accounts or company accounts, or they're going to be, making financial decisions on behalf of the company. In those cases, I want to understand how they're managing their personal finance, but I'm not going to rely even there just on the credit. I'm going to have a conversation with them about what that credit looks like. And I want, as the employer, it only makes sense to understand those circumstances, which means sometimes you get into kind of icky conversations you don't want to have with your applicants or your employees, because now you're talking about, okay, they've got a negative, credit history because their spouse lost the job, or they were unemployed for 9 months, or got a sick kid, or maybe they had cancer at some point. So you get into things that often employers don't want to get into, but that can get into when it's relevant directly to the job. And understanding this may make it relevant. So that's what this is really about when they're looking for credit. Okay, so often as you're filling out employment applications, you'll see requests for personal or professional references. And 90% of the time, this is just an intelligence test. Is this person smart enough to actually list 3 people who'll say nice things about them? And hopefully they are, but you'd be surprised how often we check personal references for some of our clients, and we'll call and they'll say, he listed me, and then they'll throw him under the bus for the next 10 minutes. But most of the time, these are people who've been prepared. And if you're smart as an applicant, you're going to give them a list of people who are going to say nice things about you, right? And so most employers collect this, and very few of them actually check that information. But I think it's always worth checking whether the employer does it in-house or has us do it, only because you're going to catch that occasional person who's got something additional information that may be relevant and help you understand more about the applicant. So make sure when you're the applicant, you list people who are going to say good things about you. They're expecting a phone call, especially on those professional references. It's certainly fair to call them in advance and say, hey, I'd like to list you as a reference. Can we quickly revisit our experience together? When I worked with you at XYZ company 3 years ago, I'm probably in interviews going to highlight this project. Do you remember that project? Do you remember my contributions to it? It's not, you're not feeding information to the person, but you're going to say, these may be the kind of questions they ask. So they're top of mind when they get that call. Now for executive level positions and certain positions that just have higher visibility or higher risk, especially risk around financial management or decision making, we have clients who actually check civil litigation. Who is this person sued? Who has sued them? What were the outcomes of those cases? What were the cases about? And like I said, most of the time, 95% of the time, this isn't really relevant for most employers. It's not something it's a lot more expensive, and they're not going to invest the time and effort into checking into civil litigation. But for certain roles, they may, and it's perfectly acceptable and legal for them to do that. So if you have something out there that as an applicant that's relevant, that matches this criteria. And I'm not talking about just divorces, but I'm talking about if you've got multiple civil judgments against you, or you've sued several previous employers, understand that may show up and be of some sort of concern, and may come up as a point of conversation at some point in the employment process. And then there's social media. Back when I was in school and a lot of us were in college, we'd take pictures at parties, and it was, maybe some stupid stuff happened, but those pictures are hopefully in somebody's shoebox someplace in a closet in Idaho, and nowhere near here for me. And I hope that person's house burns down at some point, so those pictures never get out. But of course, now the problem is kids have these parties and they put all that on social media. It's on Facebook, it's on Instagram, and they're posting it out there. And some of it they're posting where it's permanent, and some of it they're posting where they think it's not permanent, and it turns out to be a lot more permanent than they anticipated. And so this stuff follows them. And I've been talking to employers about social media issues for over 10 years, and more companies have policies that say for most jobs, we're not going to dig into social media. We're prohibiting managers from digging into social media. But I hear all the time from my HR friends that, we know our managers are Googling these people. They've got 3 candidates, and before they decide who to interview, they're looking them up on Facebook and Googling them, maybe checking out their Instagrams unofficially. And they can legally do that. They may be violating the company's policy, but they can do it. But the problem is sometimes, things get out of context. Sometimes, and we've seen this recently, something legitimate comes up that's of concern to the employer. And we just saw on January 6th, a whole bunch of people did a whole bunch of knucklehead stuff, and some of it much worse than knucklehead stuff. And then they posted it all on social media, and it's costing a lot of those folks their jobs, and it's going to haunt them well into their future. So that's really kind of key. And sometimes it doesn't seem, we'll hear some of these stories where we think that's not really relevant to his employability or not, but we got to remember why employers care about this. When they're looking at your social media, they're looking at both signs of professional accomplishment and personal issues that may be relevant to the job. This is Jared Loughner. He is the individual who shot Representative Gabby Gifford and in Arizona a few years ago, a number of years ago. But within minutes of that shooting, as soon as the local media knew who the shooter was, they were Googling him, and they found his crazy YouTube post and other video posts out there, and all these social media posts that showed this guy is a wingnut and probably should never have had access to weapons. Now, that wasn't an employment-related shooting, but can you imagine had it been a shooting at a workplace or during the course of employment, that employer would be getting grilled by the media about why didn't you know about this? It was right there. It's publicly accessible. And employers are, under the general theory out there, is that employers are liable for knowing what they can reasonably know about applicants before they put them in a role, in order to make sure that they are, able to perform that role safely without creating risk for coworkers or the public. So that's why employers care about this, and they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't in many ways, because they risk getting a lot of information they don't want, and maybe that they can't even legally use in the employment process, like age, race, sex, national origin, things like that. But at the same time, if there's something out there that's a red flag, they may, and they don't see it, and it's really obvious, they're going to be held accountable for that as well. So it's a really difficult situation for employers to be in. We do social media searches for some of our clients. It's almost always at the executive level. We just did one for a high level C-level position with a very large association here in Texas, and and that's a multiple hour search. You can imagine, think about how long you've been on social media if you're on it, and what going through your social media history for the last 5 or 10 years how much time that would take, and how many different platforms. And so to do it well takes a lot of time, but there are times where it's relevant for the employer. And so make sure your social media presence passes the don't hire a freak test. So that's, assume that context is easy to lose, and that hiring managers aren't going to spend a lot of time trying to understand what's on your social media. And so if you've got hot political opinions out there, or you've just got pictures that may not, be the your best foot forward and the best representation of you to the employer, go through and clean that up, or just make your social media profiles private. I do talk to employers sometimes who say, if I can't find somebody's social media, I can't find their Facebook or their Instagram, I just assume they're hiding stuff. But that's very, very rare. Because if you've got the good sense to keep your crazy on the lowdown, then that's probably a good sign for the employers that you're going to have that same approach in the employment context. But like in this picture here, you see this, if this woman in the background is your job candidate, and you're just doing a Facebook search, and boom, here's this picture she's tagged in, and oh yeah, that's her, but this is who she hangs out with. I'm not, I don't want to hire somebody like that. I can't put her in front of customers. She may be a weirdo. But in reality, you look at this, and if you see the background on that photo, it looks like that she's probably at a conference. If you've ever been at a big conference with a vendor area that's got the draped backgrounds behind each of the vendor booths, and it looks like that's what, they're in a convention center of some sort. And for all we know, and I think very likely in this photo, the guy with the unusual body decorations is probably some sort of entertainer hired by a booth at that conference to get attention for them. And so she took this picture, maybe she posted it, or maybe a friend took the picture and posted it and tagged her in it. She may not even know it's out there, hadn't even thought about it in several years, but that could, give an employer pause. And so don't let something like that, whether it's fair or not, it's not, why don't even, if you've got the ability as an applicant to clean it up or to make it not publicly available, that makes your life a lot easier and will help you avoid having to explain things. So let's jump into the legal issues surrounding background checks. The federal law that governs employment background checks is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Ignore the word credit. It ought to be called the Fair Consumer Reporting Act because it covers consumer reports, which is all information used for employment, consumer lending, or insurance underwriting that's purchased from third parties like me, background check companies. So credit bureaus, but also just all kinds of background checks. And so the FCRA is the federal law that governs it, and it gives you as the job seeker specific rights under the law. First of all, it limits what a background screening company or a consumer reporting agency under the law can report to an employer. And in the employment context, most negative information cannot be reported after 7 years, except if the position pays more than $75,000 a year. And so why $75,000 a year? Well, when this law was passed, $75,000 a year was a highly compensated individual. It's not so much now, but the law has not changed. And so if somebody's going to make more than $75,000 a year, then everything can be reported regardless of age. But almost everything, and I highlight almost everything, goes away after 7 years if the position pays less than $75,000 a year. The big exception to that are criminal records. Criminal records are reportable forever. Criminal convictions, let me clarify that. Criminal convictions under federal law are reportable forever. They never go away, except criminal convictions are limited in some states to only 7 years, or even there are other restrictions as well. But in Texas and most states, there's no limit under state law, and the federal law doesn't limit that either. So criminal convictions last forever, even if you're making less than $75,000 a year. But there are states like California that limit the reporting of criminal convictions to 7 years, and some other states have other limitations as well. So when I speak to what are often called felony-friendly job fairs, where I'm speaking to people with criminal histories about their history and how to apply and find meaningful work, even with a criminal history. And sometimes somebody will come up and they've got a really long history, and some of it is, but I mean, a lot of it's outside of the 7 years, but they're still having, maybe a hard time convincing employers that they're really a different person now than they were when this history happened. And sometimes I suggest, how do you like California? What does that appeal to you? Because employers in California won't see that older criminal history on their reports. Madison, Wisconsin limits the reporting of criminal history, or limits employers from considering criminal history older than 3 years. So think about that. And so that may be a really great, if you can survive a really cold winter. I mean, we're here in North Texas and it's below 32 right now. And I get angry when it's below 40. That's when I start getting angry. And so I couldn't handle a Madison, Wisconsin winter, but some people can. And maybe that's where, people with a really heavy history, may need to consider moving in order to have some additional legal protections in their job search. Now, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, employers have to disclose to you as the job seeker that they're going to order a background check, a consumer report under the law, and they have to get your authorization to do so. And so there's all kinds of different forms out there that the employers can provide to you and get your authorization to procure the background check, but they have to do it before they order the background check from the screening company. And then once they get a copy of the report, if there's anything potentially negative on the report, the employer has to share with the consumer a copy of the report and a summary of their rights under the law. And they have to do that before they make an adverse decision based on the report. So if you claimed on your employment application that you had a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Texas, and the background check comes back that they were unable to verify that, before the employer says, he lied to us, let's go on with our next candidate, they have to give you a copy of your report and a summary of your rights under the law right up front before they make that decision, because you have a right under the law to dispute any information that may come up on the report. So you get a copy of the report and there's something wrong. Maybe it attributes a criminal history to the wrong person, or you didn't get fired or terminated involuntarily from this previous employer. You voluntarily quit or whatever. You've got time to dispute that information to the background screening company, and that's your right under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And then the background screening company, we have 30 days to reinvestigate that information that we provided to the employer. And if your employer is dealing with a good background check company, they'll get it done the same day or within a day or two, as quickly as possible. They're trying to work that, reinvestigate that information and get the right information if it's incorrect to the employer, or verify to you and the employer that yes, the information we provided is accurate. Then once the employer has provided the applicant a copy of the report and a summary of their rights, after you have received that, the employer can then make the hiring decision and put it into place at least. And so they can say, okay, yeah, we're going to go with another candidate. We're going to withdraw our offer, or we're going to eliminate you from consideration, however they look at it. And they have to give you another notice that explains that they are what action they're taking. It also has to have additional information like, here's how you contact, if you want to punch Mike Coffey in the nose, here's his contact information, that kind of information. And it's got to be specific in that letter. So you should be getting, if a background check is being performed legally, and information is coming from a third party like Imperative, then you should be getting two notices before the job, two notices if the background check had some impact on the hiring decision. You should get it one before the impact and then another notice after the impact. So the number one rule when you're dealing with prospective employers about anything in your background, whether it's criminal history, previous employment, whatever it is no surprises, okay? And you want the opportunity to tell your side of the story to the employer before the background check has an opportunity to, or before the employer calls references or previous employment and learns something that maybe they never asked you about. But even if they didn't ever ask you about it, it may be something that you want to present to them. So you're telling your side of the story first. So on the criminal history question, my recommendation to applicants is always on the application, ask the question that's actually asked on the answer the question that's asked on the application. So if it says, have you been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years? Just answer that question. So if you've been convicted of 15 misdemeanors in the last 7 years, but you don't have any felonies, then you can say no to that question, right? You're answering it honestly. Have you ever been convicted of a misdemeanor or felony? Well, if maybe you've got maybe you're currently on deferred adjudication. You pled guilty to an offense and you're serving probation, but that's not a conviction. So if the employer asks, have you ever been convicted? You can say no. And that would be my recommendation. But then that third question you see on the screen is our standard question, or something similar to our standard question, which basically says, have you ever had a criminal case filed against you? Tell us about every case you've ever had filed, regardless of the outcome, whether you serve probation, community service, or completed some other conditions to avoid prosecution. Tell us about everything. In that case, you better tell them about everything, because not telling them about every single thing that's happened in criminal history in the past would be falsifying your application. And again, I tell all our clients, if they're dishonest with you coming in the door, it's not reasonable to expect their behavior to change after you hire them. So, let's say you've got something negative. Well, let's jump back one thing. On that criminal history question, you hear a lot of well-meaning organizations that are trying to help people with some sort of criminal history find meaningful work. They give them the worst advice you can possibly give them. And you're hearing this from an HR guy who talks to other HR people all the time. Answering the criminal history question with "will discuss" means that you're going to get eliminated 99% of the time right up front, because "will discuss," if I see "will discuss" on the employment application on the question to the criminal history, my answer is no, we're not going to discuss it. I just asked you a legal question and it's legal for me to ask it. And you're choosing right now not to comply with the company's policies or our process. And what you're telling me is that you're only going to comply with our processes when it's convenient for you, and you're not going to be forthright and honest with us about circumstances. Now, you may not think that's fair, but that's the reality. So writing "will discuss" is going to get you eliminated. The other thing is to think about it. what do people assume? Oh man, he must be a serial rapist or a master criminal if he's got a will discuss on this and tell me his side of the story and all of that. No, they're going to assume the worst. And so if you've got a DWI from 7 years ago and you're at will discuss because you want to try to frame it in person with your own language, you may be really short selling yourself and costing yourself the opportunity to actually have a conversation around that offense in an actual interview. So don't write will discuss. Unfortunately, I hear that so often, and I think it's a real mistake. So let's say they only asked about, have you been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years? And you haven't been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years. So boom, okay, I can answer no to that. Now you're in the interview. Maybe it's the first or second interview. You're at the point where you can tell we're about to move to the next conversation about actually taking this job. You need at some point, ideally is in an earlier interview with the HR folks, you need to disclose anything they may not even have asked about. So maybe they didn't ask about misdemeanors, and you've got a misdemeanor theft by check from 2 years ago. Assume it's going to show up on the background check. And so you need to have that conversation near the end of the interview. Typically, you're talking to the applicant, to the interviewer, and you say, "Hey, there's one thing I need to be really frank with you about. You haven't asked about it, but 2 years ago, I screwed up my bank account. I just lost my job, and I was not able to cover a check, and it went to the court and got prosecuted for theft by check, and I pled guilty to the offense and paid the check off," whatever the story is. But you lay it out there so that they understand it, because when they get the background check from me, all it's going to say is guilty of theft by check of and maybe the dollar amount and what the sentence was. But if that HR person is looking at this and they're saying, okay, I've interviewed this person, and then I put my credibility on the line and forwarded this application to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager's interviewed this guy. He spent his time on it, and now they didn't tell us about this thing that's coming on the background check, and I have to have a conversation with the hiring manager about why I didn't know about this or why I didn't tell them about this earlier, those kind of issues. Even if they never asked you about it, they're going to feel like you weren't honest with them. So as early in the process as you feel comfortable, I really recommend that you tell them that, hey, this is something else that may come up, and I just want to have a frank conversation, because at least that way you get to share your context and your side of the story, because there's no your side of the story in the background check. The background check is just going to show the black and white facts. And so you want to get your story in there before they ever run the background check. And that's not just criminal history. It can also apply to things like the reason for termination in a previous employer. If you know it's a small organization and there's a good chance that employer may talk to the previous supervisor, and there's a problem with that previous supervisor, make sure during that interview, even if they don't ask, well, so why did you leave this employer? Maybe you voluntarily resigned. And maybe the answer is, sometimes you really enjoy a job and you go along, but then you get a new manager, a new supervisor, and for whatever reason, two different people have problems working together, and they both try to successfully work together and they just can't manage it, and one of them has to go. That was a circumstance I found myself in. Now, that is completely understandable to everybody who's ever had a job working for anybody, right? We've all had some sort of working relationship that just wouldn't work, no matter how much we tried. And so you tell that story. Now, when that prospective employer calls the previous employer wants to throw you under the bus and is really unprofessional about it and all of that, that makes you look better, right? And it gives you some credibility because you were frank and upfront about it. And it's not a complete surprise to the employer. So lay your cards on the table when you're dealing with prospective employers before the background check has an opportunity, or the reference checks or anything like that has the opportunity to cost you the role. And like I said, be prepared with a true explanation of the circumstances. But even if that former employer was a giant pain in the neck and it was just a jerk, you just had awful a-hole of a boss at some point. Don't say that part. Don't place blame. Say, hey, I accept my part of the responsibility in not making this thing work. That's what an employer wants to hear. They don't want to hear, well, that wasn't fair, or this circumstance was not fair. You know, people want to, talking about fairness is the quickest way for an employer to give an employer a reason to look for the next applicant. You know, be honest, but if you go too far in placing blame, it's going to hurt you. If it's criminal case information, be prepared with all the details. It's amazing how often applicants provide come across as really lazy about providing their criminal history information. If you got a DWI 3 years ago and you write, I don't remember where it was, or I don't remember how the case came out, or unknown as far as some of the information, that just tells the employer you're not taking it seriously. You're not taking the application process seriously. The same goes for providing contact information for previous employers. It's your job to do the research to fill out your employment application correctly. It's not the prospective employer's job to go dig up a phone number for that previous employer. Now, our clients pay us, handsomely to do that, and we're glad to, but really that should be your job. And it makes you stand out against other applicants. Because like we know, if your work experience is like mine, it's not hard to be a really great employee, because most employees are so mediocre and show up at work with such a half-ass attitude. If you show up on time, you're anxious to solve problems and move forward and get the job done, you're going to be the stellar employer. That's why I tell high school and college kids all the time. It's not hard to stand out, and you can stand out in the employment application by just having those details ready and completely filling out the application in a really professional manner. And then if it's something about a bad job experience or criminal history experience or anything like that, give them a good example of how that past circumstance isn't a reflection of who you are today, what you learned from that experience, how it changed you, and how who you are today, and give examples of who you are today that suggest that you're not the person who made some bad decision in the past. And so employers are looking at criminal history. They're looking at the nature of the offense. What did the person do? How does it relate to this position? And how long ago did it happen? And then they're looking at that whole applicant against all the other applicants. And so maybe you've got a DWI, a public intoxication, and a theft by check from, in the last 5 years, a whole bunch of little minor stuff relative to the job. And it's not really directly related to the job. But if I get see a background that's got 1, 2, 3, 4 offenses that are just not really, directly relevant to the job, but it shows this person is kind of a knucklehead, doesn't manage their business well, is maybe not a compliant person. This just tells me I'm going to spend a lot of time managing this person as an employee, and I don't want to. None of us are hiring people we want to manage. We're trying to hire people who will get the job done with as little management as possible. And so that's what employers are looking for in this process. They're looking to mitigate risk first, but then also find people who are compliant and are going to fit in our organization without a ton of management. If you're concerned about what's on your credit history, you can go to annualcreditreport.com and get your credit report free from all 3 credit bureaus from this one website. They will try to sell you the your credit report with a score. And if you're applying for a car loan or something like that, you may want to see the score. But if you're just concerned about all the credit lines being accurate and really being up to date, you don't have to pay for any of that. It's free, and you can get it once a year from each bureau. So if I normally tell people who aren't in the job search, you ought to probably pull it from one credit bureau every 3 or 4 months throughout the year, so that because they pretty much have largely the same information at each bureau. And so I'd pull it from, several times a year from different bureaus, so that you kind of stay on top of what may be on your report. But if you're in the middle of a job search right now and you think maybe something is negative, is hurting you in your credit report, go ahead and pull it from all 3 bureaus and take a look. And that takes us to questions. And so I'm going to try, unless Jeff has picked out some already, I will try.
Yeah, I've been keeping track here. So Karen asked, at what, oh, let me back up here. The first question is, and I guess, and I don't know what I did with it. At what stage do most of your customers or your clients actually conduct a background check?
Okay. Probably 90% of the time, my clients are checking the background after an offer has been accepted. And so that's, again, it's 90%, so it's not all the time, but usually they don't want to spend the money. And our background checks aren't little cheap $30, $40 background checks. Most of our clients are spending $150 to even $300 on background checks, on a really thorough, good background check, reliable. And so they're not going to waste that money on every applicant. There are employers who run a really small, basically a database driven background check on the front end, just to eliminate anybody with obvious red flags or who appear to have been dishonest on their application. But that's really the exception. Most employers are waiting till after they've made an offer. Now, some clients, especially on really hard to fill positions where they need to put the person to work right away and they don't want to lose a candidate because the market's hot for that job skill, they may run their last 2 or 3 candidates while they're wrapping up final interviews. And so sometimes you'll get the background check or we'll get it before the person is the final candidate.
Okay, Mike asked, how do you verify that you have the correct records when there could be a very common name involved?
Okay. The real challenge for employers is trusting their background check company. So when criminal records are at the local county levels are indexed primarily by name and date of birth. And a good background screening company is going to be looking for at least 3 identifiers: name, date of birth, and address match or something like that, to try and really make sure they've got the right person. So we talked about the consumer dispute process. We get 1 or 2 disputes a year. And even in those cases, we usually don't end up changing anything. It's just the applicants jerking our chain. In fact, we've got a section on our website called Bad Hire Days that just tells the story of people who were hired by employers who didn't do the thorough due diligence and what happened to those employers after they hired them. But we've got a story on there from last January about a bad hire day averted, where we had an identity theft issue where somebody completely assumed someone else's identity. And we just posted another bad hire day story about somebody like that as well. But if we get the 3 identifiers, we're not going to make a mistake. It's the name, date of birth, and address, or driver's license number, something really unique. Sometimes we'll get a social security number, but it's rare. So those are the processes we go through. Now, employers who are relying on just a cheap database product, you can imagine John Smith or Jose Gonzalez. It's possible that there's certainly likely even that there's more than one person with that name and the same date of birth. And we see that in our searches. Sometimes we'll come across a criminal record for somebody, and then we dig deeper in and we realize it's not our person. It's just somebody with the same name and date of birth. But employers can get burned with those cheap databases. And if you happen to know that, let's say your name is John Smith, and there is a John Smith out there with a criminal history, and you found out about it from another database, background check, or something like that, I would make sure the employer knows, hey, there is another John Smith in Macon County, Georgia, with a criminal history, and that's not me. I just want you to know, in case, because it sometimes shows up on the background check. And he's got the same name and date of birth, but if you look, you'll see the addresses are different. And if they'll do the research, they'll figure out that it's not me. And that's helpful to do that right up front if you know about it. Now, what we see sometimes is people telling the employer, I don't have a criminal history, but there's somebody out there with my same name and date of birth with the same record. And the employer will tell us, oh yeah, so if you see this record out of Macon County, Georgia, ignore it. Then we get in there and we find that record, but then we realize, oh, this record really is our applicant. And the applicant's just telling the employer that. Then we'll do the extra research to demonstrate that. Sometimes we even pull mugshots, but we'll verify it's really the right person and then give it to the employer.
Okay. Lisa asked, does being unemployed lower your credit score or affect your report?
Strictly being unemployed doesn't. What now what your credit behavior, it changes during unemployment, could affect your FICO score. Because it's looking for all kinds of variables as far as what your credit may look like. Now, we're not a credit reporting agency for those kind of purposes, and we never report a FICO score. So I'm not an expert in that, but I do understand that they've tweaked the FICO score over the years, and there are some a lot of behavioral things in there, and so they've gotten pretty predictive, and so it could affect your score.
Okay. Brandon says back in 1996, he had to do a background check for top secret clearance when he was 19, and it was valid to 2001, and he may be going through that again. He was wondering, what's your experience with doing any federal government clearances?
We don't do clearances because, unfortunately, you would want this to be done really well, but that goes to the lowest bidder. And it's not exact. And every now and then you'll read stories about, there was a big scandal a few years ago about one of the low bidders who was doing the government clearance work, just stamping everybody, no records found, no records found, no records found, and not even doing the research. So there are multiple levels of clearance, and it'll, at the highest level, they're going to go out and send investigators out, sometimes government employees, sometimes private contractors, to even do interviews and stuff. So it just depends on the level of clearance, but they make mistakes too. The problem is when they make mistakes, often the candidates aren't given a chance to clear that up.
Okay. Karen asked, what if you don't have a lot of social media presence? Is that a negative these days?
Some employers think it is, and I tend to disagree. There are some people for certain jobs. If I was looking for somebody who was kind of introverted and kind of kept to themselves and wasn't just a big peacock like I am, then maybe the fact that they don't have a social media presence is a positive thing, because that just reaffirms to me that this is kind of a private, introspective person. But I don't think it's predictive one way or the other. I think whatever content's out there, you need to make sure is really relevant. It's not going to hurt you in the job search, but I don't think not having one is really all that relevant. It may just show that you're really prudent.
And I've heard that.
It may show that you're not crazy.
Right. And I think I've also heard that, if you have a good LinkedIn profile, that probably will suffice if you don't want to be on Facebook or you don't want to be on anything else. But if you are on Facebook or you're on Instagram or whatever, try to carry, Terry Sullivan talks about this next Tuesday at our LinkedIn workshop, that you want to make sure that your brand across each media is almost the same so that it sort of ties together. So you may want to use the same profile picture all the way across, make sure the same kind of data. But yes, you should on Facebook, hide your photos. There's no reason for people to see all that kind of information.
Right.
All right, let's see here. I'm looking down through the questions. Can a person get a search on themselves?
There are companies that provide that. In fact, we're rolling that out later this year. That's on our plan anyway. The problem is it just depends on what you're willing to spend, because our clients spend a lot of money on that. And so it can be, a lot of job seekers are hesitant to spend that kind of money. And I certainly understand that. And the reality is, why, the question I always have when a job seeker contacts me about that, or an individual wants some background check on themselves, is why do you want it? And often they say, because I want to make sure everything's accurate. Well, this isn't like a credit report where it's just coming, if it's being done well, it's not just coming out of a database. So, and just being spit out within, 5 seconds. So if somebody comes to us and they want a background check because they're concerned that negative things may be out there that are inaccurate, well, if they buy my background check for $150 or even a $300 one, they're not going to get that information because my team, we're really thorough and we make sure everything's accurate and up to date when we report it. And so you're going to get a report that says no records found and you know, and it's whatever's found is found, and it's going to be, but it's going to be right. And then if the employer is using some fly-by-night database company or one of the giant data brokers that sell most of the background checks out there, there's a high chance that something inaccurate that, you know, that looks like it's you but isn't could get reported. And so that's kind of the struggle we've had with rolling out a self-check type product is, you know, we're going to do it right. And you already know what's on your criminal history. So either you're trying to find something that's incorrect that may show up, or you're just curious if that negative item, that negative criminal history item from your past is going to show up on a background check. And just because we report it doesn't mean that a less expensive company that doesn't do as thorough research would report it. So that's kind of the downside on that. So we're trying to figure out, do we want to look for potential red flags so we can warn a consumer that, hey, there's somebody with a similar date of birth and a similar name, and it may show up. But if we start doing that, that makes it even more expensive. So we're still working through that process.
Okay. Alan asked, how do you verify education claims for a foreign national, somebody on an H-1B, work visa, or green card with education in Europe, Asia, Latin America?
The laws are different everywhere. No place in the world has the concept of open records like we do in the US. So if it's in the EU, there are data transfer requirements we have to go through, special authorizations we have to go through. We're usually very successful. We usually work with a local who speaks the language there and understands the processes locally. But we're usually really successful verifying education and even employment internationally, especially in the EU and the more developed parts of Asia. But when you get, we spent 7 months to verify the education, someone's education from about 25 years ago from an African university in Malawi. Ultimately, what we had to do was route back through the master's program from the UK and get verification that they had still in their files of the undergraduate education. It was a real pain in the neck just because we couldn't get it. We have a lot of delays in Pakistan, for instance, getting education verifications out of there. So it's just a mess. But we can usually do it. It's just not in 2 to 3 business days like we can here in the US or Canada.
Okay. This next question, I don't know, like for you, but it says, what if you left your previous position in not so favorable terms and you can't list your previous manager as a reference? Can you list former colleagues in the same team? You know, maybe they can consider your work.
It depends on the question the employer asks. If I ask for supervisor's name on that, on the employment application, and you give me somebody who wasn't the supervisor, you just hurt yourself a lot. You come across as dishonest in that case. If I ask the right questions during the verification. So it depends. If they just ask for professional references, then sure. But if they ask for the name of a former supervisor, that better be the role that the person had, or you're being dishonest. And a lot of our clients have zero tolerance for that.
Okay. Lisa asked, are you going to talk about, so I mean, we're just in the questions now. What about drug tests and medical history?
Okay. Medical history is not relevant under the Americans with Disability Act at any point pre-employment. Once the employer has offered you the position, they've got in 3 business days can request medical information or a medical exam that's relevant to the job. So if the job if you've got to be able to lift 75 pounds to do the job, then they can ask, do you need any accommodation to do this? And they can also ask, for some sort of physical exam with a lift test or something like that. Drug testing is not considered a medical exam, so they can do drug testing at any point in employment and can require it. And a lot of our clients do that. I will say that I'm talking to more and more employers who are removing marijuana from their drug tests for non-safety sensitive positions because they just don't care. And my advice generally to employers is to treat marijuana like alcohol. And if somebody shows up impaired, then we're going to deal with the impairment, and it'll probably cost you the position. But if more and more employers, because it's legal in so many states now, we've just become a lot more relaxed about that. But employers in Texas are perfectly fine if you test positive, or even just admit in the application process that you have recently used marijuana. Employers can completely disallow you from further consideration.
Right. All right. Rhonda asked a sort of a long question. I'll sort of take the second half of her question. What should we do if we have concerns about the background of coworkers, or perhaps even like a moving company crew, or office workers?
Well, okay. So let's talk about in your own workplace first. I think the answer is going to be mind your own dang business. If you've got concerns about that, if they're legitimate, I would address them to HR, and I would explain why you're concerned, and hopefully it's some sort of behavior on the job that causes you concern, and so HR can address that direct behavior, and that's the best way to do that, and let them deal with it, and don't go spreading rumors and gossip. I've helped so many employers untangle stuff that arose because somebody had a suspicion and they went and did their own Google search and got the information wrong, or it just causes a lot of drama in the organization. And nobody comes out looking good in that circumstance. It's best if you've got legitimate concerns that are based on some sort of work-related behavior or something you've seen, raise that to HR. Now, when you've got contractors coming in your home, and that's, like you said, moving companies or folks who, electricians, plumbers, things like that, I would talk to the, because I'm in the business and I know what questions to ask. I often will talk to, to those kind of contractors about what do your background checks look like? What are you doing? We have clients, high wealth clients, who before anybody steps foot on their estate, whether it's a plumber, a groundskeeper from the, whatever service they use for that, they run their full enchilada background check through us. But that's something most homeowners aren't going to do. So I would at least try and talk to background screening or talk to the contracting company about what their background check looks like, and get some sort of comfort that they're going to do it. They'll all say, "Oh yeah, we do a background check," and you don't know what that really means as far as being relevant to the job and how good it is and that kind of thing. But at least they're doing something.
Okay. Lily says, when we accept a severance package, sometimes it's flagged not eligible for rehire, just because that's part of the agreement when you take the severance package. What effect does this have when a prospective employer does a background check?
Well, when we verify employment, that's one of the questions we always ask. And if the employer tells us, no, they're not eligible for rehire, we'll ask why. And often they won't tell us anything else beyond that. So it's not very, useful as far as understanding the full context, but we'll report it back to the employer, not eligible for rehire. And in that case, hopefully you as the applicant have already explained that during the interview to the prospective employer. Hey, here's what, here's what happened, and here's why I left there. Here's the full circumstance, and they're by their own policy or by our agreement, I'm not eligible for rehire. But you should have at least told your side of the story before they ever see the background check.
Do you have a particular industry or employers that tend to be more likely to check background checks?
I can tell you who's less likely. Your really low wage jobs are restaurant servers, back kitchen folks in restaurants, things like that, are very unlikely to do some sort of background check. But depending on what statistics you see, but often is some of the numbers are 85 to 90% of employers do some sort of background check now. It's just the question is, how thorough is it, and what are they including, in the effort?
Yeah, I know I used to work for a bathroom remodeling company, and when I'd hire people, the question I would always ask them is, we're going to run a background check on you. What am I going to find? And as long as
Right.
you were honest with me and you told me what I'm going to find, great. But if I found something that you didn't tell me about, I went to the next employee. I mean, it was just like, be honest with me. I don't mind hiring people with a background. Just
Right.
fess up to it. Be honest about it. One last question here. Lisa asked, and she says, I'm taking prescription drugs that could show up on a drug test. Do I take those prescription bottles with me to the testing facility so that they know, or do I just, let them know when you take the drug test that these are the current medications I'm on?
Yeah, you definitely at the a lot of the collection sites will ask that. But here's the process: when you take that drug test, if it's being done through any reputable organization, the next step is going to be, when it comes up positive for a substance that's being tested for, it'll go to the medical review officer at that testing lab, and that medical review officer is a physician, and they will contact you directly and say, okay, you tested positive for this amphetamine or Adderall, let's say, and do you have a prescription for it? And you can say, yeah, and they'll ask for the doctor who prescribed it and maybe the pharmacy where you're getting that information from. And then they will verify it. And in that case, the drug test will come back positive or negative, which is, negative in this case is a good thing. A negative drug test means there's nothing, no substances shown. But if you can't come up with a prescription for it, or let's say it's, THC or something like that, it's going to show up on the test and go to the employer. So really just be on, if you're going to have something in your system, be on the lookout for that phone call from that medical review officer, because that will, it's funny how often we hear from applicants who say, well, I never heard from them, or I didn't have time to call them back. And so it's in our MRO will go through, we'll wait 3 days and try to contact them over a 3-day period. And if the applicant can't bother getting back to me in 3 days about it, we're going to report it positive to the employer. And then if they come up with a prescription after the fact, then that's fine, and we can edit the report. But it's better that if the applicant just responds right away.
Right. All right. Well, Mike, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Great information. I hope everybody learned something. I always find this talk fascinating, especially I really like the questions that tend to come after the fact, because I think it's really interesting what people are thinking about and what they've run across. So, Mike, thank you very much for your time today, and we'll see you next year.
Well, I hope so. Good luck, everybody, on your search.
We'll invite you back. All right, next Friday, 9:30, Transitions, Making Sense of Life Changes with Clay Tarpley. For those people who have not put their information into the chat box, if you haven't put your name, phone number, email address, position you're looking for, a couple target companies, please do that now, so I can make sure we get that information out to everybody who was part of, I can put it out this afternoon with our update on everybody of what they're doing. Please remember, we put out programming every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 1 o'clock, and every Friday morning here at the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. LinkedIn on Tuesdays, interviewing on Wednesdays, effective resumes on Thursday. This Tuesday, Terry Sullivan, he's a great speaker on LinkedIn. He's going to talk about how to tell your key contacts who you are, what you do, and how you help. This event will not be recorded, so if you want to watch it, you need to watch it live. It'll be on Zoom and on Facebook. On Wednesday, as Mark talked about earlier, we'll be doing session number 7, discussing compensation and the circumstances of why you left your previous position. And then this Thursday, we have a special guest speaker for Effective Resume Thursdays. Rex Sayot's going to talk about strategies to beat the ATS system. So we all have to deal with that when you fill out an application. He'll be a great way to, talk about how to do that. Also, we are giving away 1 month of unlimited use of jobscan.co. Yes, it's co, not co. I didn't forget the M. Jobscan.co. If you like to, if you want to have a chance to win, you've got to join us this Thursday. This session has been recorded. It will be available on the Career FW Facebook page and on the Career USA YouTube channel. You'll be able to view it as often, as much as you like. We don't put the PowerPoint slides out because, quite frankly, without the words, you lose a lot of the meaning. So you'll be able to go back and view it. It'll be up on YouTube in a couple hours. It takes a couple hours for them to upload the video. Please follow us on Facebook. Just like us, follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. When you do that, every time we post a new video, you'll find out all about it. On the YouTube channel, it looks like this. It's Career USA. You should be on playlist. That's the link I tend to put out to everybody. And then don't click on the videos, but click underneath where it says View Full Playlist. And when you do that, up will come a list of all the different titles, and then you can pick the video that you're interested in watching. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great weekend. Looks like we may have some snow in the forecast here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So for those of you who live farther north, you're already getting the snow and ice, but for us, the whole city will be shutting down next week. So come back, join us on, while it's too cold to be outside or whatever, come join us for one of our calls next week. So have a great rest of the day.